Welcome to Storytime, brought to you by the OWSCyCon2019, the online book event of the year.
Nola dug her fingers into the warm dirt. Around her, the greenhouse smelled of damp earth, mist, and fresh, clean air. Carefully, she took the tiny seed and placed it at the bottom of the hole her finger had made. Thump. Soon the seed would take root. A sprout would break through to the surface. Thump. Bang. Then the green stem would grow until bean pods sprouted. Bang. Thump. The food would be harvested and brought to their tables. All of the families would be fed. Ah! The voice came from the other side of the glass. Nola knew she shouldn't look, but she couldn't ignore the sounds any longer. It was a woman this time, her skin gray with angry red patches dotting her face. She slammed her fist into the glass, leaving smears of red behind. The woman didn't seem to care as she banged her bloody hands into the glass over and over. Magnolia. Nola jumped as Mrs. Pearson placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't pay her any mind, Mrs. Pearson said. She can't get through the glass. But she's bleeding. Nola pushed the words past the knot in her throat. The woman bashed her head against the glass. She needs help, Nola said. The woman stared right at her. Mrs. Pearson took Nola's shoulders and turned her back to her plant tray. That woman is beyond your help, Magnolia. Paying her any attention will only make it worse. There is nothing you can do. Nola felt eyes staring at her. Not just the woman on the other side of the glass. The rest of the class was staring at her now, too. Bang. Thump. Families. The food she planted would feed the families. Bang. Pop. Nola spun back to the glass. 2 guards were outside now. One held his gun high. A thin spike protruded from the woman's neck. Her eyelids fluttered for a moment before she slid down the glass, leaving a streak of blood behind her. See, Mrs. Pearson said, smoothing Nola's hair. They'll take her where she can't hurt herself or any of us ever again. Nola nodded, turning back to the tray of dirt. Make a hole, plant the seed, grow the food. But the streaks of blood were burned into her mind. The setting sun gave the greenhouse an orange-red gleam when the chime finally sounded. Students, Mrs. Pearson called over the sounds of her class packing up for the evening. Remember, tomorrow is Charity Day. Please dress and prepare accordingly. Anyone who doesn't come ready to leave the domes will be sent home, and their grades will be docked. Thank you, Mrs. Pearson, the students chorused as they drifted down into the hall. Magnolia. Nola pretended she hadn't heard Mrs. Pearson call her name as she slipped in front of the group leaving the greenhouse. She didn't want to be asked if she was all right or told the sick woman would be cared for. And she didn't want to see if the glass had already been wiped clean. Lights flickered on, sensing the group headed down the stairs. Hooks lined the hallway awaiting the gardening uniforms. Nola pulled off her rubber boots and unzipped her brown and green jumpsuit, straightening her sweater before shrugging out of the dirt-covered uniform. The rest of the class chatted as they changed. Plans for the evening, talk of tomorrow's trip into the city. Nola beat the rest of them to the sink to scrub her hands. The harsh smell of the soap stung her nose, and the steaming water turned her hands red. Been in a minute. The only sign of her time in the greenhouses that remained was a bit of dirt on the long brown braid that hung over her shoulder. Nola. Jeremy Ridgway took his place next to Nola at the sinks, shaking the dirt from his light brown hair like a dog. It would have been funny if Nola had been in the mood to laugh. Are you ready for tomorrow? Sure. It's our duty to help the less fortunate. She sounded like a parrot repeating what their teacher said every time Charity Day came around. Nola turned to walk away. Jeremy stopped her, taking her hand. Are you okay? Wrinkles formed on his forehead and concern filled his deep brown eyes. Of course. Nola forced herself to smile. Do you want to come over tonight? Jeremy asked, still holding her hand. His cheeks flushed. My sister and my dad are off duty tonight, and she hasn't seen you in a while. I've got to get home. My mom leaves tomorrow. But tell your dad and Gentry I said hi. Nola pulled her hand away and half ran down the hall. More lights flickered on as she sped down the corridor. She made herself breathe, fighting her guilt at running away from Jeremy. She liked being in the greenhouses better than the tunnels that dug down into the earth. There might only be a few feet of dirt on top of her, but knowing it was there pressed an impossible weight on her lungs. The hum of the air filtration system calmly buzzed overhead. The solar panels above ground generated power so she could breathe down here. She pictured the schematics in her head. Lots of vents. Great big vents. The air would be filtered, cleaned, and purified, and the big vents would bring oxygen down to her. Blue paint on the wall read, "Bright Dome," above an arrow pointing to a corridor on the left. Nola ran faster, knowing soon she would be above ground. In a minute she was sprinting up the steps. She took a deep, gulping breath. The air in the tunnels might be the same as the air in the domes, but it felt so different. The sun had set, leaving only the bright lights of the city across the river and the faint twinkle of the other domes to peer through the glass. Nola squinted at the far side of Bright Dome. The other Homestead domes glowed gently, but if she tried, she could almost make out a few stars. At least that's what she told herself. It might only have been wistful thinking. Tall trees reached almost to the roof of Bright Dome. Grass and wild flowers coated the ground around the stone footpaths that led from house to house. Nola followed the path through the buildings to the far side of the dome. 12 families shared Bright Dome, each of them lucky enough to have been granted independent housing units. The trees in the dome hung heavy with crisp green leaves. The flowers had begun to close their petals for the night. A squirrel darted past Nola's feet. "A little late getting home, buddy." Nola's pulse slowed with each step closer to home. The birds were all flying back to their nest. Bright Dome had been assigned robins and blue jays this cycle. The birds and the squirrels shared their home to be kept safe from contamination. The domes provided them all protection from the toxic air and tainted water. The lights were on in Nola's house as she swung open the door. "Hey, Mom," Nola called. The sound came from her mother's office in the back of the kitchen. "How was your day?" Nola pulled the pot of steaming vegetables from the stove, knowing they would be overdone without having to lift the lid. "Fine," her mother said, running her fingers through her shoulder-length chestnut hair, which had been graying quickly of late. "We've been running samples in the lab all day." "You'll figure it out." Nola didn't ask what the problem in the lab was. Her mother, Nola Kent, was one of the heads of the Botanical Preservation Group. It was their job to decide what plants from the outside needed to be preserved and how to take care of those plants once they were safely inside the domes. Whatever her mother was working on was for the good of them all. Beyond that, it was all vague answers about classified projects. Nola pulled bowls down from the cabinet, dishing out steamed beans and broccoli, adding spices to make the food taste like something real. Nola pushed the bowl in front of her mother. Only when she put the spoon in Lenora's hand did her mother seem to notice Nola was in the room. "How was your day, sweetie?" Lenora looked up at her daughter. Nola's mind flashed to the woman, pounding on the glass, shattering the serenity of the greenhouse. "It was fine," Nola smiled. "Don't forget to pack for the conference. It'll be colder at Greenleaf, so pack your sweaters." "Of course." Lenora nodded, but she was already looking back at the charts on her computer screen. Nola carried her dinner up the narrow stairs to the second floor. She crept into her mother's room and found the duffel bag under her bed. Nola pulled clothes out of the tiny closet. They were lucky. The residents of the domes hadn't been forced into uniforms outside of work and school. Yet. That would come when there was no one left on the outside to work in manufacturing. When she counted out enough blouses and slacks for her mother's week-long trip, Nola moved the suitcase to the head of the bed, where her mother would have to see it if she went to sleep that night. A picture in a carved wood frame sat on the nightstand. 6 faces beamed out of the photo. A 10-year-old version of herself sat in a tree above her mother and father. Kieran sat on the branch next to her, and below him were his parents. Nola touched her father's face, wishing the photo was larger so she could properly see his bright blue eyes that had matched her own. But her father was dead, killed in the same riot as Kieran's mother, and now Kieran and his father had been banished from the domes. The photo blurred as tears pooled in Nola's eyes. She slid the picture into the top of her mother's bag. Lenora would need a bit of home during the Greenleaf conference, even if their family had broken. Nola snuck across the tiny landing at the top of the stairs and into her room. She climbed straight into bed, leaving her dinner forgotten on her desk. She pushed her face into her pillow, hoping sleep would come before the face of the woman desperate to get through the glass.
This story time was read by PJ MacLayne and brought to you in conjunction with the OWSCyCon2019. OWSCyCon runs from May 17th through May 19th. You can find us at OWSCyCon.ourrightside.com. Again, OWSCyCon.ourrightside.com. We have events happening across all genres. If you are a reader, you cannot afford to miss this event. You never know. You may just find your next best read.